working the committee today.
Thank you so much, Chair Coffey. First, I would like to call it Chair Coffey.
Present.
And Director Corbett.
Here.
And Director Rosario.
Here.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. This is Deborah Ocker, the Assistant General Manager of Finance and Management Services. And we also have Dr. Alvarez here with us today, our Deputy General Manager. We have Michelle Strawson-O'Hara, Assistant Finance Officer. We have Deborah Spalding, Assistant Finance Officer. Christina Crosby, our Budget Manager, our new Budget Manager. And they will all be presenting with me today. Today's Finance Committee meeting is held in accordance with Governor Newsom's executive order, allowing board meetings and standing committee meetings to be held remotely. We have provided the Zoom address on our agenda, and we also have a YouTube stream for anyone to view. There are 3 ways to do public comment for this meeting. Members of the public can email our recording secretary, Caitlin Stone. They can also send an email, a voicemail, and they can join the Zoom meeting for public comment. At this time, I don't believe we have any public comments yet. So with that, I will turn it back over to Director Coffey.
All right, and so Director Rosario and Director Corbett, are we comfortable with the procedure, the process, and ready to launch?
Yes.
All right.
Aye, aye, Captain.
Deborah, just a programming note. I have on agenda item 1 the designation of R, but I understand this is actually just an information item on the budget.
That is correct. Thank you for the correction.
Just so I don't skip over a needed vote on some matter. So that does move us to agenda item number 1, the preliminary 2021 general fund budget presentation. Thank you for all the work that went into this. It was very well done in terms of the presentation.
I believe Dr. Alvarez is going to start us off with some opening comments.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you so much, Deborah and Director Coffey. Deputy General Manager, Dr. Ana Alvarez. It's a beautiful day to deliver the mission of the East Bay Regional Park District. And I wanted to take a moment to share with you all the good work that has been done by our staff, which has been done in a collaborative effort to bring forward our best recommendation pertaining to the proposed budget for 2021. But what we're doing today is we're just presenting you a snapshot of the general fund in anticipation of the proposed budget, which will be coming to you later in November. These, what you're going to be seeing here today, it basically highlights our response to emerging and urgent needs, as well as our long-term priorities for the Park District. And I wanted to say to start that it does incorporate, as you saw in the board material, the priorities from the board directors, which have been identified in past board workshops, and understanding that the COVID pandemic upended our workshop planning to a certain extent. We did bring forward in the workshops that we did have a little bit of the information pertaining to the impacts of COVID to the budget. But most importantly, Deborah and the general manager and I made sure we went back to 3 years to understand the board's priorities over the last 3 years of those workshops. And so that's folded in as well. In addition to, we're bringing forward the work that has been developed pertaining to the Park District's performance plan. And these are annual work objectives that also fold in the board priorities. So overall, I think it's a good, robust proposal that you can have confidence that speaks to not only the emerging needs and the urgent needs for us to address, but also it focuses on long-term board priorities. And in fact, we are listening. The other thing I wanted to say is that understanding the uncertainty, the economic uncertainty in which we are living, it does have some revenue projections that does have an impact to the general fund, and certainly staff will be going over those. The last thing I would like to say regarding the sneak preview of the general fund is the fact that if you look at everything that's coming to you, is primarily focusing on one thing: wildfires. So you have allocations of resources to 5 different investments in strategies for vegetation fuel management, including shoring up our weed abatement efforts, given that we have eliminated the use of glyphosate, and also mitigating for the impacts of wildfire smoke to ensure employee safety. So we have a public investment, or we're proposing to have a public investment on 5 different ways in which we can address wildfires, which certainly continue to impact all of us. Yesterday was a very difficult day for many of us who have families in Southern California. So wildfires is a new abnormal, and we continue to address those pieces. In addition, there's a request for a diversity, equity, and inclusion community impact assessment to carry out the board's policy and direction on denouncing racism and standing in solidarity with Black people and all people of color. So those are the biggest highlights as you start understanding the general fund. And again, the general fund is just one element of the overall park district's portfolio as we think about the entire proposed budget for 2021. So this is just a preliminary preview to give you an opportunity to engage with us in a conversation so that we can understand those proposed public investments. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Deb so she can walk you through the entire report. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you, Ana. That was really helpful. So I will jump into our slides here. So as Dr. Alvarez already mentioned, this year was an unusual year. We had our board workshop process interrupted, as everything else was, by COVID. And so our normal process, which would have 5 board workshops, we only had 4, and they were all on a different timeline. And all the impacts of COVID continue in the future. And so as we're looking at what to do in 2021, we really said we need to be conservative and sustainable in our budget strategy. We'll get more into the detail later, but the biggest impact is, of course, our property tax revenue, which is our largest source of revenue. And that increase, it's still an increase this year, but it's a smaller increase than we are used to. I was just looking back at the 2020 budget, and that was a 7.4% increase we had in 2020. And this year it's 4.1%, I believe. We also had an impact in our fees and charges revenue. And we worked closely with the Business Services Division in Operations and asked them to come up with various scenarios for revenue expectations. And because we're still expecting this to be shelter in place for at least part of 2021, we're not going to be able to provide the full programming that we normally would. And so fees and charges are also going to be budgeted lower than they were in this current year. And lastly, revenue from interest earnings is budgeted $1 million lower, so almost half of what it was in 2020. And we have slightly lower grants revenue for programming. That's just some high level information, and we'll get more into the details in future slides. So despite these revenue impacts, we will continue to maintain our pre-COVID service levels in our parks for maintenance and for programming to the degree that that's possible. We are fully funding all current staff positions and all benefit cost increases. And we will also be funding safety and training and public education related to COVID, wildfire prevention, and then wildfire smoke air quality response. In addition to maintaining our current situation, we're able to make some increases in really targeted areas. So one big highlight for the operations department is the addition of a second trails crew, and that's using the Student Conservation Association. We've had a first small trails crew for several years now. This year we're adding a second one, and they'll continue to focus on maintaining our smaller natural surface trails. We're also able to set aside some funding for grazing infrastructure improvements, and that actually will bring in even more revenue for the Park District because it's used for matching funding for NRCS partnership projects. We were able to add a second fuels crew in the fire department, so that's 3 FTE, and they, like the other existing fuels crew, will be assisting with brush and small tree removal. And then lastly, at least on this slide, we're continuing to address our long-term liabilities. So putting forward $1 million for the pension trust, funding natural infrastructure repair and renovation, and then also our own infrastructure repair and replacement for our MER fund. This is a pie chart, and it really looks almost exactly the same as it has in other years because property taxes are such a large part of our general fund revenue. Even though it's a smaller increase this year, it's still 90% of all of our revenue. Charges for services are a little bit lower this year at 7% of the total general fund revenue. Property usage, which is for things like grazing or landowners, people using our property and paying us, is 1%. And then all other revenue is 2% of our general fund budget. On the expenditure side, personnel costs are our largest expenditure, followed by supplies and services at 17.5%. Then intra-district charges, which are fees and charges for services we provide ourselves, but that we're charging our own departments, such as equipment and our major infrastructure fund. 5.1% of our general fund budget is for transfers out. And so that's transferring money out to special projects or for debt service, for example. And then lastly, we have capital outlay, which is for major equipment, 1%, and interagency agreements, 0.1%. This year, we were able to add 12.65 new staff. Now, 3 of those are actually from Measure FF, and 0.5 is in our HCP funds. And so I'll just walk around this pie chart and give a little more detail about the positions being added. In the operations department, it's some staff related to Measure FF, 1 new equipment mechanic, and that's related to maintaining some of the equipment that we've had to buy to address the reduction in the use of glyphosate. So we've purchased additional heavy equipment, and so we need staff to help maintain that equipment. And then also upgrading 9-month positions to full-time park rangers. In the public safety division, the 4 FTE, 3 of those are the fuels crew, and then 1 is a police services technician position. So that's a non-sworn but public safety position. In ASD, that new position is for Measure FF. In finance and management services, we're adding 1 FTE in the information services division, that's a help desk person. And in the executive and legislative division, that the 2 FTE are in the human resources group. This pie chart is showing staffing changes by type. So all of the positions being added in 2021 are represented. 1 of them is police association, so that's 8%. And the remaining positions are all AFSCME, the majority in the field. As mentioned earlier, 3 of them are fire positions, so the fuels crew members are AFSCME represented. And then the remainder are office positions. And now we're just going to give you a few highlights of some of the projects and priorities that are being funded this year. And so first, addressing our long-term liabilities and mandates, we are able to fund our MER fund, Major Infrastructure Renovation and Replacement, with $3 million this year. We are continuing to provide funding to our pension trust of $1 million. We're continuing our practice of increasing our funding by $100,000 per year for wildfire hazard fuels and vegetation reduction. So last year it was $1 million, this year 1.1 million, and we've been doing that every year. So this is the 11th year we've been able to do that. As Dr. Alvarez mentioned, we are putting funding towards air quality, wildfire and smoke-related improvements to facilities. $150,000 for hazardous tree removal, and $100,000 for diversity, equity, and inclusion assessment work. And now here are some more projects that might be categorized more as programmatic needs or vision achievement. So last year we eliminated the use of glyphosate in our parks, so we are continuing to upgrade and purchase new equipment to address that need to cut down small fuel grasses and small shrubs. We've added that second small trails crew, funding for livestock water improvement projects. Out at Miller Knox, there'll be a major lawn rehabilitation project. $100,000 for natural infrastructure. So that would be funding for things like dredging ponds, where we have natural infrastructure that's really providing a resource to the district. And then for weed abatement labor, we're bringing on a CCC crew to do work in the parks as needed. This slide is comparing the 2020 adopted budget with our 2021 proposed budget. And so just taking it from the top down, looking at our property tax revenues. So this year is a smaller increase than we're used to, but it's still a really significant increase, and we're very happy and lucky to have that. So $6.3 million increase in property taxes, which is 4.1% above last year. Charges for services, on the other hand, are reduced, and that's based on us likely not being able to provide all of the programming and services that we normally would. And so business services has come up with this reduction for charges for services. Property usage has a small increase, and that's related to a single parcel out in the Delta area that will be providing additional revenue this year. Our interest earnings are going to be greatly reduced in 2021 related to lower interest rates, especially on our pooled cash. And then the last significant change to point out is in miscellaneous revenue. So about $100,000 lower, and that's predominantly Regional Parks Foundation grants that would be for programming, but because we can't do all the programming we normally would, it's a slightly lower revenue amount. And on the expenditure side, our personnel costs are 3.4% higher. So we always fund all full benefit increases and COLA increases as needed. Supplies and services have a small increase. Capital outlay this year, the amount that we're funding is less than in 2020. And if you recall, last year we had quite significant purchases for glyphosate related equipment. And the fact that we'd gotten rid of glyphosate and we were buying major mowers to help with weed abatement. Interagency agreements is staying steady. Interdistrict charges slightly higher related to higher costs for insurance this year. And overall total expenditures are 3.4% higher than in 2020. Lastly, transfers out are slightly lower this year, so we're transferring out a little bit less of our general fund for special projects. And then just to walk you through what's to come in 2021. So this month we will be providing a presentation to staff on November 18th, giving more detail about the 2021 proposed budget. Then we'll come back to the Finance Committee at the end of November and present the proposed budget in full. So this was just the general fund, and we'll be giving the full overview of all funds. And then to the Park Advisory Committee on the same day. In December, the budget comes to the Board of Directors twice. On December 1st will be the introduction of the proposed budget, that first public hearing. And then on December 15th is the adoption of the 2021 proposed budget. So there is no action. This is an informational item, and we'd be happy to take any questions.
All right, thank you, Deb. If there's nothing, as I was about to say, if there's nothing further from management, but I see there is. Deborah Rocker.
Thank you, Director Coffey. Thank you, Deb, for your presentation. I just want to give a little bit of context. You know, we are looking at a year of declining increases. So to give some context, this year our property tax growth is about 4.1%, and last year it was 7.4%. So that's a pretty huge reduction in the growth of our property tax. Similarly, our personnel costs last year grew by 6.8%, and this year it's 3.4%. So we really did, you know, need to reduce the amount of growth that the district has been used to over the last several years. And that was really, you know, in the prior year, we added 27 new full-time equivalent positions. And this year, as Deb said, it's about 12. So we really did reduce our growth in costs to match our revenue. And you can see the numbers are barely balancing right now. We worked hard at presenting you with a balanced budget. And I always have to put in the disclaimer, this is October, and we still have about a month's worth of, you know, refining and number crunching. So there's typically some changes in the numbers by the time it gets to November for you. So I don't want you to be surprised by things like that. And we'll point out any of those changes to you. That's all I wanted to add.
Well, yeah, and as usual, you're doing the half empty rather than half full conservative advice and counsel to the board that you usually do. It bears pointing out that our property taxes are actually growing, not at the rate they have in the past, but it means that during the course of this year, when you've been counseling us to look at a small growth in property taxes, and it was at times suggested that we weren't being gloomy enough in looking at what was going to happen to property taxes, as you know. So your projections have been pretty spot on property taxes, and will be significant in that we are not contracting next year like a lot of public agencies who are getting hit because of lost sales tax revenues, for instance. So that's the good news, you know, the half full rather than half empty view of what's going on here. And the fact that we have historically grown, especially in staff, with property taxes, which of course reflect the growth in population and need for our services. So when property taxes are lower, we don't have the ability to do that, and there hasn't been as much growth in population that otherwise would have done. So again, things to me are strikingly consistent with what they should be, especially with the very good quality management of these issues that we have in place. I'll turn it over to my colleagues for questioning on the report. Ellen, do you want to go first since you're not muted?
Oh, sure. My questions are all over the place. So since you haven't given me a chance to organize my questions, I'll just jump right in there. Let's see, where shall I start? I'm sorry, these aren't in any particular order, but first of all, thank you so much for giving us this little heads up sneak peek before it comes back to us again in a more comprehensive way. And then of course, our two opportunities in December as a full board to review the budget and adopt it. Appreciate that, because obviously things are shifting a bit, and very much appreciate that extra care and sharing with us, you know, the ups and downs of our financial picture. But I do appreciate also the great care that's been taken into balancing the budget and ensuring that we don't have to, at this point, impact people's jobs or lay people off. Obviously we did have the seasonals that we were not able to bring back because of, programming limitations. But in any event, I appreciate the care taken to preserve and protect people's jobs while we look at other ways to balance the budget. So with that, I will jump into it with my unorganized thoughts and questions. Deborah, I'm sorry, I was trying to find it in the document, but I didn't. You just let us know that there was a 6.8% growth in personnel last year, I think you said. Is that what you said? And I didn't get the number of positions last year.
Yes. So in the 2020 budget, it was an increase from the prior year of 6.8% in personnel services, and that included adding 27 new FTEs.
And this year, I did get it was 12 new positions, and what was the percentage of FTEs?
3.4%.
3.4. Okay, thank you for that. So I do have some questions, and maybe this is better answered at a later time, but I am interested. I very much appreciate the fact that funding is being put aside to address smoke and air quality work site issues. Clearly, this is going to be something we need to address as the years go by. It's not just a once in a while type of thing these days. So if there's any way you can give a little bit of detail, or we can defer to another meeting, I just am curious to know a little bit more about what that $200,000 will be paying for.
Dr. Alvarez can answer that.
Yes, thank you so much. Yes, Director Corbett, Deputy General Manager Ana Alvarez. I would tell you that this is the beginning, you correctly pointed out, of an ongoing program. So this is to fund an assessment of our current facilities where we have the highest risk for fires. And it also adds a little bit of space to be able to do small engineering, physical engineering changes that may not require a large capital investment, that can be done through the park's operations, mast, and in-house basically. And other additional mitigation factors that we can put in place, not necessarily out in the field, but in other facilities like our administrative headquarters, the public safety headquarters, that can mitigate and mitigate for the exposure to wildfire smoke, but also provide additional respite. So it's a combination of things. And again, I'm going to emphasize that this is the beginning of what we need to do to shift the way we do our work and the places in which we do our work. So that's what I can say for now.
Okay, thank you very much. I do appreciate the attention to that, and I know that we will be incorporating the need for shelter during smoky days into our ongoing planning as we continue to, update, upgrade, build other facilities, etc. I'm thinking, I think I've mentioned this before, as we do, or if we do build additional sites for, the word is escaping me right now, but places where we store equipment, a courtyard type facilities, that they may be built in a way perhaps that they can be swing spaces for indoor work space. That just is one thought that maybe we can look at into the future. And then I wanted to ask about the small trails crew, the second small trails crew. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? And is this a long-term plan? Is this, I'm asking this question for a couple of reasons, but the main one is as we bring on additional crews, I just would like to know what our financial planning thoughts are as we add employees into the future, and how we figure out those costs, and whether this is more appropriate place to put dollars. And I'm assuming these crews are, the Small Trails crew is, are outside employees?
That's right. I see
Answer
that,
that, Director Corbett.
yeah, I see that Kelly Barrington looks like is on, and this is actually funding that his group requested. While he's taking himself off mute, I can, oh, good, here he is.
There he is.
Want to
Hello,
respond to that one?
Good afternoon, Director Corbett, members of the board, Kelly Barrington, Chief of Maintenance and Skilled Trades. So the second Small Trails crew is basically a duplication of the existing Small Trails crew that we funded and put in place in 2019. You met Patrick Demmons. He did a nice report out to board operations and the board on their accomplishments. So not only are they doing small trails maintenance, they're doing fuel reduction work by default in some of the more critical corridors between people's homes. They are helping out with fire responses in safe zones to create new fuel breaks as they need to. And one of the other side benefits of this program is even after our first year, one of those participants from the SCA crew was able to successfully apply for and secure a job with the park district as a park ranger. So we see this as a program that, you know, is the beginning of something bigger at some point. We know that the federal government at this point, if the administration changes, is working on some other programs that could help expand this into the future on a number of different levels, not only with fire, but also on operations. And I think that this serves the district well in that our trails are our single most important recreational asset. It's what most people surveyed want to do when they come to the park district. So it's just an expansion of the current program. The funding for the crews is one time. The supervisor that we're proposing for the separate crew is already employed here. They were part of the AWP program, and we're simply transferring them from operations to MAST because the county is no longer providing labor through their jail deferment program.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you very much.
No problem.
And let's see, with regard to the second fuels crew, you know, obviously we all understand the need for that. It's pretty apparent. But I do have a question. I don't know how to delicately put this. I also see this as noted in our documents that this is another great opportunity to bring people into the district and, you know, use it as a bridge to employ new individuals. But I'm just wondering, as we reflect on our diversity goals and our, you know, gender equality goals, that, you know, when we do the hiring for these positions, I don't know how to say this, but it seems like we mostly hire guys. So I know women can do those jobs. And if this is going to be seen as a bridge to employment in other areas of the park district, I just want to make sure that we, you know, think about how we build that bridge so everybody can cross it.
Yes, thank you, Director Corbett, Deputy General Manager, Dr. Ana Alvarez. And in response to your thoughts, I appreciate the leadership and the consistency in providing us with the board's interest and direction pertaining to diversifying our workforce. This is an item that speaks very much to the heart of the Department of Human Resources as we look at our hiring practices, as well as promotions and other types of employment conditions that impact the ability not only to hire, but also to retain our diversified workforce. And at the next board executive committee meeting on November the 5th, the board, which includes you will be listening to our last EEO report, as well as some near-term and short-term action plans that we're doing in parallel with the internal assessment that we have embarked on to understand precisely those practices and those policies for the hiring of representative workforce that speak to the communities that we serve. So all of that is coming together. And yes, absolutely. As Kelly mentioned, this is one portal, one entry portal, and we will be mindful on how we do our hiring practices and what we do to mentor and shepherd and coach those individuals into permanent employment positions with the district. And that also includes the fire crew. In the fire department, we also have another entry portal equal to our apprenticeship programs. So all of that is being looked at very carefully, and we will be able to continue the conversation with the board and be able to report out some of the actions that we're embarking on and the barriers that we're trying to take down.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I would just comment, clearly the fires crew, the fuels crew that we have hired is doing phenomenal work and making a huge difference in the parks. And I have no concern about the individuals we have hired. If we're talking about bridges, let's just make sure that the bridge is built that everybody can cross. So I see Chief Chaburo has his hand up over there too.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam President, Board of Directors, colleagues, and members of the general public who are present. Anthony Chaburo, AGM of Public Safety and your Chief of Police. I welcome that question and thank you for keeping that topic ongoing. And in addition to the response of Dr. Alvarez, I just wanted to say that we are considering that. We're always talking about that at Public Safety. And we do have Chief Tiley, who is really a robust example of diversity. I know you're aware of that. I'm just very proud of her and her accomplishments, as we all are. So thank you for, again, keeping that topic going, and we will keep striving in that direction.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And she serves as a great role model for employees of the district too, and around the region for that matter. So yeah, thank you so much. Okay, so thank you for that. Just a few more points and a couple more questions. I just wanted to mention, very happy to see the investments for long-term liabilities. Obviously, making those payments in the short term serves us well in the long term. So thank you very much for that. Very, very smart. Appreciate that we do that too. We always set aside funds to help address our long-term liabilities so they don't sneak up on us. And let's see, with regard to, I know we didn't speak directly about this in your presentation, Deborah, but with regard to transportation funding, that some of which we didn't spend this year for access to the parks, do we have some opportunity for, since we're not spending that money, is that money we can set aside for future transportation to the parks? I want to make sure that we continue to plan for access to our parks. And I know obviously we don't know exactly what will be happening over the next few months with regard to field trips and such, but I'd just like to hear how we're planning ahead for continuing those great programs that we have and even expanding them if we can.
Director Corbett, we did, the 2021 budget includes the same base budget as the 2020 budget. So as you mentioned, we had to cut some of our expenditures during this year to respond to our reduction in revenue. And so we did reduce our appropriations for busing programs, mainly because we didn't do any of them.
Right.
So the budget before you does include that kind of fully funded program. And then I would recommend that using mid-year funds would be an opportunity to see if we can, if we are fortunate and our revenues come in greater than expected for this current year, then we can look at our mid-year opportunity money and see if we can use some of that for additional transportation.
Okay, thank you for that. And then there was another item, and I forget exactly, it was natural infrastructure. I'm hoping that might include forward planning for inundation and bay rise type projects, or maybe you can more fully explain what the natural infrastructure expenditure is for.
Certainly. Thank you, Director Corbett, for the question. Deputy General Manager, Dr. Ana Alvarez. What you see in front of you is a very small droplet of what in the beginning of a conversation with the board, as well as within the park district, to start understanding how to start financing the park district's responsibility pertaining to sustaining and maintaining its natural infrastructure. Very much like what we do with the 553 fund of our man-built infrastructure, our roads, our facilities, our systems that support those facilities. The natural infrastructure speaks to our natural assets, and it speaks more to a body of work that needs to be done pertaining to dredging for our lakes, our bodies of water, to maintain the health and the ecology of that natural asset. It also speaks to ecological regeneration, which is a little bit different than ecological restoration. So we're trying to regenerate the existing natural services that are found within our natural spaces. For instance, the ability for our plant material to be able to healthfully sequester more carbon, our waters to be clean, our air to be clean. So just maximizing and maintaining and sustaining those natural assets. As you know, the district has a good body of history in trying to address those issues, as we've seen in the body of work with Jewel Lake, Lake Temescal, and other bodies of water. And that requires a planned maintenance program that needs to be financed. So this is the beginning of understanding what are those natural assets, how do we program them to the event that we can start financing their maintenance. Dredging can be very expensive, extremely expensive, as we have found out. And so this is just the beginning. And that's what it speaks to. We will be able to speak more to it in 2021 once we have done the body of work to understand what needs to be done. And I also would like to, in speaking with Deborah, to start thinking about what can be done now in some of our bodies of water. And that's what it is.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. I do hope then, my comment on that would be, I do hope then that just as we address fire mitigation because of climate change and plan ahead with our fuels crew and all the other great work that we do to protect our lands, that we also start looking ahead as to how we set aside the funding to address climate change, inundation, and shoreline sustainability issues. And that's very much on my mind because I was briefed yesterday in advance of our work that will be coming back to us to address what's going to be happening on McKay Avenue in Alameda, and got to see the inundation maps of the Alameda shoreline. And it's a bit scary. So, we're very good at looking forward, and we're a great organization for understanding that we do have to keep up with climate change and do what we can to slow it down when we can too, as just mentioned by Dr. Alvarez. But I'm hoping we can start planning in that direction as well, and figuring out, who our partners are in this really important goal, because obviously it's not only up to us to protect the shoreline, but we should find some partners to partner with as well. So that's my comment on that. And then my one last thing is, I did notice that the 2 budget meetings in December are both daytime meetings. And I was just wondering if that is going to change. As last year, as you know, we had it one daytime and one evening. Try to make it more accessible to folks. I just raised that. You don't have to answer that, but maybe food for thought whether maybe we should do that again or not. I'm sure other board members may weigh in on that as well. So thank you so much for answering my questions, and thank you for making it so easy for us really to understand these challenges that it will be facing us in the future. Thank you.
All right, just one point before turning it over to Director Rosario. Deborah, in terms of process, I understand the full budget comes to us in these 2 hearings in December. Do we get, and I'm sorry, my memory's off, I've been through this process. in what form do we get to look at the capital budget before it actually gets put together in the big package? And is that a combination of project reports that are ongoing?
Director Coffey, when we come to the Finance Committee in November, we can focus on the capital programs and projects budget a little more than we have in the past. Typically, we do focus a lot on operating, but the whole budget, the whole draft proposed budget will come to the full board in mid-November. We're going to deliver it to everyone. And then the Finance Committee will meet on that Monday before Thanksgiving, and we will make sure we cover questions about the capital budget. And then it will be also presented to the full board at the December introduction meeting.
Okay, this sneak peek just made me start thinking about, well, okay, general funds. I'm very curious also what's going to happen with capital projects in terms of how you folks are projecting the future. Director Rosario?
Oh, thank you. Yes, thank you. Just thank you to everyone for this great body of work. And I appreciate that once again, we have a balanced budget. But I just wanted to comment on a couple of things that Director Corbett had mentioned as far as infrastructure for wildfire smoke. I know that in particular Redwood, it had to, they're undergoing a major rehab of their system there, the heater and air system there, because they weren't able to turn it on to help mitigate some of the smoke, because they found out that their system was rodent infested. So that whole system there is being rehabbed and redone. And for their respite, they had to go to their vehicles. And so not ideal, but I think that's part of the work that Dr. Alvarez has pointed to, that I think some of these service yards are being upgraded so that there is in fact some respite from smoke. And then on the small trails crew, I'm supportive of this. I think the report that Patrick Demons gave to us about how many projects there are and how many years it would take to do all of those projects. I think it was something like 7 years. And I think it's going to be like Collins Bridges. You know, once you paint one side and finish it, you have to go back and start over again. So definitely the small trails crew is definitely needed, the second one. And then on the hiring of women in our fuels crew, I think I am totally for that. I think at the last graduation of our first firefighter or fire crew class, there were 3 women that were on the SCA crew, and I sat next to them and they were saying, we could do that work. And I said, yes, you can, put in for it. So I just wanted to show that, to know that there are women in the SCA crew that said, yeah, we could do it. And I think there'll be plenty of opportunities for that. I hope we continue that. And then just my comments on the main package of the budget. Something I've been stressing since I've been on the finance committee is the need for additional staff on the auditor's office. And I think in subsequent years, we've seen audits where vendors and/or programs we've seen like 4 years, 7 years, 11 years in between audits, and I think that's unacceptable. And I think especially now, if we're going into a downturn, it's really important that we keep track of how our money is managed and spent, and especially when we have. And I think last year we had something like 55 or over 50 projects that had to be, that are in progress. And those projects need to be audited as well. And I think we need to find a way to give an additional staff to the auditor. I think it's extremely important. And I think we should try to find a way for that. And then my only other comment is, there's something else that was brought up at the COVID task force. There's a possibility of a need for more vehicles to accommodate social distancing on park crews. And if we can figure out how much money is available, or if I think Dr. Alvarez, I think Jim O'Connor was going to assess how many vehicles they could possibly need. And we're not talking about full-size vehicles. We're talking about smaller size vehicles like ATVs or electric vehicles, or that can help supplement the transportation and or the movement of crews within parks or between parks. We need to I think we need to find some room, additional room for that. And then my last comment is, I think I really like the idea of setting aside monies for long-term liabilities. And I think one of the long-term liabilities that we really should think about as well are equity adjustments. Those are, as was pointed out by Allison Picard, that yes, unions are, those are usually negotiated items, but at the same time, they are really liabilities that face the employer as a whole, and no negotiations will take care of all inequities. And I know having done one negotiation where the union was given the money to disperse, one position can take up the majority of that money. So, no matter who is trying to disperse the money, either union or management or the district, there's a choice to make. You either take care of the most egregious, or you take care of the most people that you can. So I think that's an important issue or important monies we should be setting aside for. And that's it. But thank you for a very nice, very good and thorough and very easy to follow report. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, I'll follow with one question, and I'm not sure who this is for. Perhaps Dr. Alvarez. We're seeing funding to upgrade 5 park ranger positions from 9-month to year-round, and that triggered the question I have of how many remaining 9-month positions do we have? And this is within the context, to me, of our needing additional fuel crews and trail crews and all the work that's going on in vegetation management in general, that it just seems to me less and less necessary over time to have 9-month rangers instead of just full-time rangers doing a lot of this work. So I'm wondering if that's still an issue, or have we come pretty far toward not having those 9-month staffing positions anymore?
Well, thank you, Director Coffey. You place a lot of confidence in my memory. I don't know that level of detail. I think that question is best left for Deborah or Jim O'Connor, but I can say to you that Jim has been very persistent and very tenacious over the years, at least for the last 5 years, to move forward for the conversion of those positions. And it speaks to the practice that we're doing things incrementally so that we can absorb them correctly. And I see Kelly has turned on his video, so I'll turn it over to him.
Sorry, Kelly Barrington, Chief of Maintenance again. Yeah, that Ana has, or Dr. Alvarez has captured that for the most part. Our strategy over the years has been to take the 9-month positions and infill them, is what we call this, and upgrade them to 12s. It increases the capacity in the parks. It eliminates some of the furlough questions where we're calling 9-monthers back to work. The benefits for a 9-month employee cost the same as a 12-month employee anyway on the medical side and so on. So the extra expense is actually minimal, and we're creating additional capacity for all kinds of work in all kinds of parks all over the district this way. The trend sort of began in MAST back in 2012. We've converted all those 9-month positions to 12s with a great deal of success. And I know Steve and Jim are working to make that happen in operations. There will be a few cases where people want to remain 9-monthers, and we'll deal with those through attrition and fair practices, the way the district always has. But that's essentially what we're up to and what we've been doing for, as Ana said, five or 6 years now.
Okay, thank you. Ana?
And Director Coffey, if I may, I would like to address Director Rosario's comment on the fleets and the vehicles.
Oh, sure.
I think that I appreciate the good conversations that we've been having at the Labor Task Force with our organized labor partners and our board members, Director Rosario, Director Waspy. And we've had ample conversations about how do we mitigate and provide more opportunities to minimize vehicle sharing during the pandemic, which is very, very important. And yes, we did ask our AGM of operation to take a look at what we call right sizing the fleet, which means that we're looking how, to your point, Director Rosario, how to mobilize or how to people move within the park and between parks. And it's not necessarily acquiring a full-size vehicle, but it could be an alternative to other types of mobilization equipment, like even electrical bikes or gators, smaller off-road vehicles that can help them do their work, and releasing some of the full-size vehicles for transportation to and from between the parks. So that's the ask that we had of GEM, and it's quite a big ask because our system is very large, and it goes back to a lot of detailed work that needs to be done. And we're hoping now that I have Kelly here that we can see how we can expedite that work so that we can understand as quickly as we can how to stop sharing vehicles. And we're open to all creative solutions, including electrical bikes. I have to say that. And then lastly, I just wanted to, in closing, I would like to emphasize what Deborah said. This is October or the end of October. There might be some additional changes to what you have seen today. And I already know for a fact that there will be one change pertaining to the proposed staffing for human resources, where we originally requested for 2 HR assistants. But HR is in transition, as you know. We continue to shore up HR as much as we can to right size the department for the size of the organization that we're supporting. And the budget came right at the middle between Kip's tenure with us and the arrival of Allison. So I would like to give an opportunity with your concurrence to see if Allison can speak to the proposed anticipated change that will be between now and the time the proposed budget will come to you.
Sure, please, Allison.
Good afternoon, directors, staff, and guests to the meeting. I appreciate the opportunity to be asked to evaluate this. I know it's at the last hour as far as the budget folks are concerned, and having done the budgets for other agencies, I know how disruptive that is to the process. But I appreciate the opportunity to evaluate it just under the wire here for the board.
Hey, Lance, I'm sorry. I'm stuck in the board finance committee meeting, but I have nothing to add for today's meeting, okay?
I thought he was green with me. Woohoo! So what is...
I think Allison got muted.
Okay. There we go. I unmuted myself. I got muted by the host. This technology is wonderful. So I was in the middle of saying that what was initially proposed in the budget is 2 HR assistants were meant to supplement the recruitment team and the benefits team. And my initial assessment is that I'd like to suggest modifying one of those assistants to a technician, which is slightly higher level, to support the recruitment team and potentially the labor effort. We're about to get into bargaining, and labor activities have grown exponentially, just especially with the pandemic. We've had many more frequent meetings with the unions, as you can imagine, in terms of impacts to employees. There's lots more to discuss, and we're finding we need more support in that area. But the additional staffing generally is needed also to support the recruitment activities. As I'm sure you've heard, most of the departments are quite anxious to get their positions filled. and for us to be more aggressive in that area, the extra staffing is going to be necessary. So you're going to at least see that change in terms of a conversion of an assistant to a tech is what we're recommending. But I've also made the recommendation to executive staff that if they really want to make a difference, an additional HR analyst would be very appropriate. And as I looked at what had been a multi-year plan for HR staffing, that was something that had been contemplated. And I would just suggest it might be worth considering moving that up because there are so many employee-related initiatives coming up in relation to supporting safety efforts. The diversity inclusion initiative is going to be big next year. There's many things that HR could support all of the employees much better with additional resources. So again, I appreciate the executive team making the consideration initially, and then certainly your board next month.
Mr. Chair, can I just ask a follow-up?
Please do. Yes.
So Allison, do you mind, you went through that very, very quickly. I know we need to address some needs in the HR department. So what is your recommendation again? What fully would you be recommending in ways
Sure.
of staff for HR and anything else that can enlighten us?
Sure. I know I got interrupted there a couple of times. So what's in the budget now are 2 HR assistants and 1 allocated to benefits, 1 allocated to recruitment. I'm suggesting that we take one of those 2 assistants and instead ask for a tech. So still 2 positions, but just change the classification. It's slightly higher, but it can do more complex support work. So that's the initial proposal. That wouldn't change the net allocation. But I was just making the point that if you really want to move the needle, an additional analyst would really be helpful because there is quite a lot of new work coming out of COVID-related duties. We're about to start bargaining. The amount of interaction we're having with labor is much more frequent, as you can imagine. And, related to the tech position, I should just put out there, because I can see Meadows on the call, so she would be aware of this. We would have to have conversations about that technician position in terms of whether it's represented or not. So I know that's a topic that will come up if your board were to agree with that proposal, and we're perfectly prepared to have that conversation about whether it's a confidential in terms of HR work or one that would be more appropriately represented by AFSCME.
Okay, great. So the 2 positions we have in the budget already, 1 potentially upgraded, and then an additional analyst. Looking forward to the amount of work that we will be facing into the next year. Yes, thank you, Allison. We very much appreciate your. It's always nice to have someone to come in from the outside and take a look and to give recommendations. We appreciate your experience in sharing that with us. So I don't know about the rest of you, but obviously I think we do know that we could use some more help in HR, just in what we've experienced with the extra needs in that department because of everything Allison just said, the conditions that we face with the, everything from smoke to COVID. And 2020 is not over yet, but let's hope that's it.
And what we've heard from our workforce and our labor
Absolutely.
representatives, that it's
Yes.
a very distinct need that they've identified.
Absolutely.
So can we move on to item 2? No objection. That would be the third quarter 2020 general fund and other governmental funds financial reports. And this is an action item to move it to the full board. And Michelle is presenting.
Mr. Chair, Can I make one last quick comment? I just wanted to mention that I don't think it has been lost on any of us the recommendations for additional resources to implement the getting rid of glyphosate in the Park District. And I just wanted to mention that I appreciate that's a recommendation. And I hope at some point too, we can measure the benefit of that change as well. We see it as a cost item, but I think there's some benefit that would be nice to measure as well. So thank you for including that. I know that's something that was high on the list by board members. So thank you.
Thank you. Michelle, are you ready to go?
I am. Good afternoon. Michelle Strawson O'Hara, Assistant Finance Officer. I'm presenting to you today the third quarter 2020 general fund and other governmental funds financial reports. Okay, I'll start with an overview of the general fund revenue and expenditures for the third quarter of 2020. This first column shows what we budgeted for revenue and expenditures, and the second column shows the actual revenue and expenditures through September 30th, 2020. The 2020 budget adjustments that were just approved by the board at their October 20th meeting are reflected in these budget totals. This next slide shows these in a little more detail and compares to the prior year. So on the revenue side, these budget adjustments included the estimated shortfall in charges for services, revenues of 7.2 million. And on the expenditure side, there were 6.1 million in budget cuts for salaries and benefits, supplies and services, as well as 400,000 for transfers out for repairs related to fire damage. Actual revenues were 86.5 million, or 52.4%, which is comparable to the same period, the same 9-month period last year, which was 53.5% of budget. Actual expenditures of 121.1 million were 66.7% of budget, which is again consistent with the same period last year, which was 66.8%. Now, if we look at the general fund revenue trends over the past 5 years, you can see that the blue line represents total revenue and the red line represents property taxes. The reduction in charges for services revenues has resulted in a slight dip in 2020, although the property taxes, which represent 90% of budgeted revenues, are on target for 2020. On the general fund expenditures chart, the salaries and benefits are the main component of total expenditures and account for approximately 60% of budgeted expenditures for 2020. Next, I'll direct you to the attachment B of the report, which on the PDF is page 17 and 18 of your report. And this attachment shows the details of the general fund revenues and expenditures by category and also by division. And where there are variances against budget of over or under 10%, we provided explanations at the bottom of the page and onto the next page. The most significant variances in expenditures are a result of staff vacancies during the year and unexpended supplies and services. However, when encumbrances are included, supplies and services are on target with the budget. And now we'll take a look at the unassigned general fund balance, which is also at the bottom of attachment A of your report. We started the year with 71.3 million. Then when we add the projected revenues of 165 million and deduct budgeted expenditures of 181.4 million, we expect to have an estimated ending fund balance at December 31st of 54.9 million. And this leaves approximately, and after we set aside the reserve target, so we have a 32% reserve policy. So after we set aside that, which is 52.8 million, we're left with an estimated excess of 2.1 million, which may be considered for other appropriations during the year. Okay, and then on attachment C on page 19 of the PDF report, this summarizes all the other funds, the special revenue funds, which include our lighting and landscaping districts and zones of benefits, and our project funds, which can vary significantly against budget due to the timing of project receipts. And we also have our debt service funds and our internal service funds, which pay for district-wide costs of workers' compensation, general liability insurance, major infrastructure and equipment, as well as employee benefit claims. And that concludes my presentation, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Okay, directors. Director Rosario?
Yes, thank you. The surplus $2 million at the end of 2020.
Yes.
Those, I was thinking, would those monies be available for some of the budget items that we were talking about earlier for 2021?
I'm going to defer to Deborah on that one, that budget question.
Thank you for the question, Director Rosario. At mid-year, we had set aside some smoothing funds. So this really is representing the amount available in those smoothing funds. And we're kind of considering them as one-time funds right now. So I believe the best place where we would utilize this would also be at or through separate board action. Typically, we do try to balance our budget based on available and expenditures rather than a use of fund balance. So I would say best to hold on to those smoothing funds right now, but they can certainly be considered.
Okay, thank you. I think that's my only question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Director Corbett?
I don't have anything else at this time, Mr. Chair.
No, neither am I. Yeah, neither am I. Neither do I. I appreciate the report, and it looks pretty much consistent with the way things have been tracking this year.
Yes, Michelle and I were very happy once we put the numbers together. They quickly put in the budget adjustments that the board just approved, and the results looked as we had hoped. So we were happy with the results of this report as well.
Thank you. The requested action from staff is before us. Is there a motion to acknowledge reviewing the reports and directing staff to prepare the information for acceptance by the full board?
So moved.
Moved by Director Corbett, seconded by Director Rosario. And is Caitlin? Yeah, Caitlin, can you do a roll call?
I can try to step away for a moment. So
Okay.
Connie Swisher, Committee Secretary, taking roll call vote. Director Corbett.
Aye.
Director Rosario.
Aye.
Director Chair Coffey.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Connie. So we'll move to item number 3, update on 2021 project budget review and approve proposed name and description changes for active projects.
Great. I'll just introduce this item real quickly. We have our new budget manager, Christina Crosby, is going to present to you today. And this is kind of an administrative process that we've introduced in the past couple of years, where from time to time we need to update our project descriptions for different reasons, and bringing it to the Finance Committee for full disclosure before it gets put in the budget is a practice that we've implemented. So Christina will walk you through this item.
Thanks, Deborah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Good afternoon, Chair Coffey and members of the Finance Committee. I'm Christina Crosby, Budget Manager for the East Bay Regional Parks District. Annually, the Finance Department prepares a project budget, project and programs budget book as part of the annual budget adoption process. And today I'm here to introduce these proposed changes for 2021 projects, including reviewing and approving proposed names, descriptions, and refinement of project scopes. The Finance Department works with staff to review active projects and incorporate changes that better define and clarify the project descriptions as projects progress. Next slide. An example of a title change is Project 51-5400. Originally created, this project was broader in scope and was district-wide, but as the project progressed, the replacement of residences at Anthony Chabot became the greater priority and focus of this project. These changes currently better define the intent and focus of the project. Next slide. Additionally, descriptions also sometimes evolve, as with this example of the project for updating the sanitary system master plan. The proposed language changes include more specificity with regards to the condition assessments of gravity sewer lines, laterals, and manholes at 4 locations, including Anthony Chabot, Coyote Hills, Del Val, and Garin Regional Park. Next slide. At this time, staff is only asking the Finance Committee to review the proposed project title and description changes and direct staff to forward to the board as part of the 2021 proposed budget document. And that concludes my brief presentation, and we can answer any questions.
Okay, are there questions concerning the proposed description changes? Director Corbett? No? Director Rosario?
Just a couple of clarification questions. On page 23, number 173700, in the proposed description change, it mentions water system study to examine options to conventional trenching, including the potential for directional boring. Does that mean trenchless? What homeowners would call trenchless technology?
You're asking us a very technical question, Director. Is what I can tell you is that the project managers have recommended these more detailed descriptions to the information provided. And so unless Deb Spalding knows the answer, I think we're going to have to get back to you on those details.
Okay.
We can get back to you on that one.
Thank you. Yeah, I suspect it means trenchless, but I'm not 100% sure. And then I had a question about, nope, you just answered that one. So I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I think one of the questions could be one of Christina's examples, that we were changing some kind of, work for residences from district-wide to Anthony Chabot. So right. What happened to those other residences? And to be honest, when we started the budget, we put it in there. And then since then, we've created new projects for Camp Arroyo residents, a new project for Vasco Hills. So it's not that we're reducing the amount of work, it's that this project ended up only being Anthony Chabot, and other projects are addressing some of the other work. Sometimes that's an example of what happens.
Okay, great. Oh, and I had one more question on page 22, 157900, Hayward Shoreline. It says the repair damaged bridge timber piles, blah, blah, blah. And then it says several years to work within the title environmental constraints. Are we having to re-up those permits annually, or do we have permits to span the entire construction?
A permitting question. I know that this bridge is something like they have been working on consistently.
Yeah.
So we, again, will have to get you a good response from Matt Grau on how long the permits last. But I know their goal is to continue and complete that entire bridge. So if they don't have those permits, I'm sure they're part of the work plan to continue to have them to do the work.
Great, thank you. That was it.
Okay, if nothing further from staff, we do have this recommendation for committee action. Before I go there, I wanted to just get an update on whether on any of these agenda items we've had requests for public comment come in?
No, Chair Coffey. Thank you for asking.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. So the recommendation is to review the report as presented and direct staff to forward to the board as part of the proposed budget for approval. Is that correct? Is there a motion? Director Rosario, second from Director Corbett. Please call the roll.
Yes, Chair Coffey. We will start with Director Rosario.
Aye.
Thank you, Director Rosario. And Director Corbett.
Aye.
Thank you. And Chair Coffey.
Aye.
Thank you so much.
So we'll move to item 4, long-term financial planning projections. Deborah Ocker. Or Deb?
Sorry about the delay, Director Coffey. I'll present this item. I am going to share my screen. So this is a follow-up on the item that we spoke about last time where we were discussing unfunded liabilities. And I promised that I would bring back some more details specifically related to the general fund for forecasting revenues and expenditures. So let's see if I can get my computer. So we've been talking a lot about our budgets at this meeting. You've had a chance to see some preliminary data on what we're proposing for the very next calendar year. Michelle presented to you how the current year is looking. And so now we're going to even go farther into the future and see what we're looking at. The district does have a balanced budget policy, and included in that policy, it speaks to all the things that we're currently doing, right? Assessing the constituent needs, priorities, and challenges and opportunities and priorities of the board, analyzing our recurring and non-recurring revenues, our recurring and non-recurring expenses, development of management strategies for long-term operating and capital plans, adherence to the budget preparation and adoption procedures, monitoring performance, and making budget adjustments as needed. And then the last point is development of a 5-year forecast of revenue and expenses, which the district does that every year as part of the budget process. And it's been included in the budget, in the adopted budget since for many, many years. So for this year, I'm going to kind of walk you through the report, and I'm going to start off with highlighting our assumptions. With any forecast, it's really built on the assumptions. It doesn't mean it's going to necessarily be accurate, but if we can feel that the assumptions are reasonable, then the forecast picture is something that we can rely on and use as a planning document. So we talk a lot about property tax because it is the greatest revenue source of the general fund of our operating budget. And so for the current year budget, Deb spoke about how, you know, this year is a little unique, and next year we feel also we're using the low property tax estimates provided by our consultant. But in general, when we do a forecast, we look at the midline annual forecast. So the remaining of the years include the midline numbers that are put into the forecast. So we're beginning with the 4.1% in 2021, which is the low, and then we're going forward using the midline up to 5.6% growth in assessed valuation. And then on the charges for services, right? The fees and the charges that we do for park usage and miscellaneous revenue, many of those numbers are reduced due to expected social distancing for next year, and the park district's not really able to provide a full services. An example of that is our concessionaires that plan events in the future. They need a long lead time for getting those things set up, and people want to have certainty that their event's going to happen. So in our budget for 2021, we're not really expecting to get much of that event concession revenue. And then the other types of programs we've dialed back, like Deb said, so that we can have a lesser amount of participation to allow for social distancing. So that is affecting our charges for services in this in these assumptions. And then once we get past 2022, or in 2022, the numbers show that we're getting back to kind of our standard budget amount, business as usual, and then increasing those revenue numbers by just under 1.5% annually. And that's based on trend data of how our revenues have grown. Leases and rents is another area that we're looking kind of at consumer price index data for, you know, what the market is out there for different leases, which does include our grazing revenues, our leases on our communication sites and things like that. So that's about 1.6% growth annually. So what does that all look like? Oh, and then we have investment revenue. Deb was good to point out that investment revenues have been very volatile over the past, several years. And here in our projections this time, we're definitely reducing our projections. The Fed said that they will keep interest rates lower for a longer period of time. And so our projections reflect that. And our transfers in to the general fund are very minimal, but they're consistent with prior years. So what does that look like? Here is the chart that we put into your packet. And we're really talking about the blue line right now. This is the revenue projection line through 2025. And as I mentioned, property tax is really the anchor of this. And you're starting with, $161 million, and it's growing to $197 million, right? 4% increase on the early years, up to 5.6% growth in 2025. And then, as I mentioned, the charges for services, we're showing a big decrease in 2021 from regular business as usual. In 2020, it's back to normal for 2 years, and then we show a little bit of growth on that side. So that's kind of what the revenue projections and forecasts look like. Now here you're also getting a preview of expenditures, which I'm going to talk through the details of that in just a minute. But unfortunately, the red line is above the blue line, which is not good. And so whenever you have this situation, you have to make some trade-offs and make decisions on what gets moved forward. So the red line is, again, it's our standard business as usual. It's continuing with our regular service levels. It's setting money aside for the ongoing regular transfers that we fund. It is not including the unfunded needs conversation. I have some future slides on that. So this is really just continuing to do what we've been doing in setting aside. So here's some details. So on the personnel side, we typically use the MOU agreements that we have with our labor partners, which would include COLAs. So our projections do include the current PA MOU, but when an MOU is not available or when you're negotiating, you have to put something into your model. For the 2021 year, we do not have a COLA built in. But starting in 2022, we chose to use data from what's currently out there, current data. So in August of 2020, the CPIW for the Bay Area is at 1.6%. And since we're still in this kind of expected a little bit of a U-shaped recession, we put that as the increase in personnel cost for the next, for salaries for the next 2 years. And then in the out years, 2024 to 2025, we looked back to right before COVID hit, which was the February CPIW for the Bay Area, and that was at 2.5%. So we put that in as a placeholder in the assumptions for salary cost of living increases. Now, of course, in personnel, there's much more than just the salaries. There's medical health benefits, there's pension retirement costs and such. And those are, we use the information that we get from our actuaries, from our PERS actuaries and our own district actuaries. And that ranges from about 5 to 6% increase annually. And we have that detailed out in our spreadsheets. Another part of the personnel cost assumptions include what we call pipeline positions. So as we talked about before, our parks are growing, the populations we serve are growing. And when we get new land, before we put it into service, we try to make sure we've provided sufficient staff before we open up new staging areas, open up new parks. And that's our pipeline positions. And this model does include our projected pipeline positions. For 2021, it was a little bit of a strange year where we had already included in the pipeline some of the things that we thought would be open, like Judge John Sutter, like Dunbarton Quarry Campground. Those had already been included. And so even though those parks haven't opened yet, we feel that we have staff budgeted for those parks. And then looking forward, it looks like there's going to be a little gap and we aren't going to be needing additional staff for the new things that are coming online until 2022. So 2022 has pipeline, 2023 has a pretty significant pipeline, and then the out years have just under $2 million set aside for that. So here is a crazy chart I'm going to share with you. So this is looking back 5 years and looking forward. And you can see this is our total personnel cost. So it includes salaries, it includes benefit, it includes pipeline. And the blue line is showing that we have continued to expand and our personnel costs have increased. Now the orange line looks a little bit crazy. So let me explain to you what that is. That's the percentage change between the years. And so that's the other axis over there. And the first spike up there is really pointing out that we started our pension trust in 2017. And so in our adopted budget for that 2018 year, we had $2 million set aside to put into the pension trust. And so that's what that big spike's about. And then, you know, based on the number of new FTEs, that really also significantly changes our growth in cost. And for both 2019 and 2020, we grew by 6.8%. So you can see that that's a little bit stable there. And then as we talked about in 2021, we have reduced the amount of new FTEs that we are adding. So it really is, it's the reason the growth has gone down is because we haven't expanded our workforce as much as in the past years. And then when you start there, we're adding back, like I mentioned, in 2023, we have, you know, our forecast shows we might need 20 new FTEs if all of the parks that are planned come online. That seems a little high, but that's what our projections show right now. And then the percent increase dips down a little bit because our pension rate increase is a little bit less than it was in the prior 4 years. So that's a lot of detail, but just to show that we are at a very kind of incremental level looking at our personnel costs, because again, that's a pretty significant part of our total expenditures. So now we just, supplies and services are much easier to look at. We do have growth in that because of, you know, just the increase in cost. When you have new parks come online, you have new maintenance and new services that are provided. Also, our programming continues to grow. And so for that, we have an average of about 2% growth after we get through COVID. And so here's just a chart showing in the past what we've, how our budgets have looked, and in the future in this chart. It's pretty steady, but it does have a small incremental growth in there. Now, another part of our general fund costs include what we call transfers out. And really, we call them transfers out. It's an accounting term, and it's because we're moving money from the general fund and we're putting it in a specific purpose. So we're moving it over for a specific initiative or a specific purpose. And the first one off the top we talked about before is the debt service on our promissory notes. So that's paid for with general fund money. It's a little bit different than our WW bonds. And so that is, we have debt covenants. We've made promises that we're going to pay this. So that really comes off the top and is required. So we have the debt service for our 2012 promissory notes, and we do expect that we're going to be issuing some more debt so we can do all the improvements necessary at our new facility for Public Safety Headquarters, Peralta Oaks North. And we expect that new debt service would be due on that in about 2023. So we have some additional debt service there. We've been talking about our fuels management program, and we do have, board initiatives saying continue to fund this program, certainly keep going and getting grants, which are put somewhere else, but the general fund is going to set aside $1 million or $1.1 million in 2021. And each year after that, it grows by $100,000. And that's kind of what we've been doing. So that's projected into this 5 years. Also, the district adopted a funding policy for our major infrastructure renovation and replacement fund. The funding in this model isn't quite getting to what the policy is suggesting, right? We have room for growth, but we have been setting aside about $5 million a year into this fund, and then spending it down on making improvements to our facilities and our paving, our paved trail system. So we have from $3 to $6 million going into this model, even though the projections in the policy are suggesting we need 10. So additional transfers out include that we put $500,000 annually for our ADA improvements. We also have environmental remediation that we set money aside for, and we've been doing that for several years. Safety improvements, which the majority has been going to making sure that Black Diamond Mines has funding that it needs. And then also a big chunk of our general fund throughout the year does end up going to support capital projects that need additional funding to get to completion if there's not enough bond money or grant money to fund that. And then certainly staff are doing preliminary design work when we're just in the infancy of some projects. So let's see, I think that brings us to another chart. Oh, I wanted to just show you a little bit about these transfers. So here's another view of what these layers of transfers look like. These, again, I'll state, these are things that have already been initiatives of the board. We've repeatedly included these in our budget. And in some ways, that way we have control over, except for the debt service component, we do have control over how much we set aside. So you can see some of the things are steady. The purple line on the bottom is the debt service for the current promissory notes. We'll be issuing new debt. That's the next layer. Our fuels management program is a high priority. Our infrastructure funding is the blue wider band, setting money aside for that. And then we have environmental remediation, equipment replacement, ADA. And then, as I mentioned before, funding for capital projects, which is an area that we can control how much we're able to set aside of general fund money for capital. So here is that same chart again with the same exact blue line for the revenue, the same line for expenditures, which includes everything I just covered. But now this chart has an additional green line, things that I haven't talked to you about. These are the unfunded needs that are not really currently part of our business as usual, but things that we've identified and we've tried to put one-time money towards it. Sometimes we're able to put mid-year funding towards these things we're calling unfunded needs. They're a little bit different than long-term liabilities. Long-term liabilities are things that we truly are committed to. So Those are the pension costs that we have, is a really good example of long-term liabilities. It's something out there, and it's something that we're required to fund. Same with our OPEB, retiree medical benefits. Those are long-term liabilities along with our debt. Unfunded needs is something that's really driven by board priorities. And so let's talk a little bit about what that is. So similar to our last meeting, we talked about some of these in a little more detail. And maybe I did not include everything that was brought up with the Finance Committee members. I need to incorporate that into my next presentation. But we've talked a lot about the long-term maintenance of our unpaved trails, right? And we're working towards that. We're setting up these small trails crews to start doing that. The other thing with unfunded needs is we don't really know how much it costs, right? With pensions, you pay actuaries to figure out. PERS tells you how much is it going to cost you in the long term. We haven't gotten to that level of detail with a lot of these items, but we certainly know there is a cost out there. And so the district is really good at setting money aside from time to time. For renovation of aquatic facilities, we did at mid-year, we set aside $2 million to, because we know that, you know, with the work at Contra Loma that we're doing, Roberts Pool, you know, all the aquatic facilities are getting a little bit older, and they're going to need renovation in time. So we're starting to set aside money for that. We talked about natural infrastructure. Now this is really new. We've always known that we have dredging projects out there. We have, you know, ponds that need work, erosion, things like that. And so we are just now, oops, did I go back? Here, go back to that. We're just now thinking about setting aside a, you know, and we'll bring it to you at your next board workshop. Let's talk about the natural infrastructure that the district already owns and already knows is out there. And as Director Corbett asked, you know, is this including sea level rise? Not really. Like, that's a whole nother level of, you know, funding that's out there. These are really just the things that we already own that we know need maintenance. Shoreline restoration, the work that we do on our wetland properties, that's really the majority of that. And then preserving and maintaining cultural resources. I put in a little bit of funding for, you know, developing some facility for archives. You know, how can we keep our archives safe? And we're doing a whole bunch of work on our conservation lands. What is the monitoring and the mitigation requirements for that? And then wildlife and resource protection, alternative energy sources, and then getting to that $10 million for our infrastructure funding someday. So these are all things that, you know, they add up to a whole new level, that green line on that previous chart. So here's kind of an example of what that might look at. Now, since we're coming out of recession in 2022, we didn't set aside a lot of money, but a little bit of money for that. And then as the economy gets back to normal and gets better and we have more growth in our property tax assessed value, then we can set more funding aside for that, those types of things. So that's a snapshot of what we have put into our forecast for this green line that you see here that's called unfunded needs. Now, this chart is just slightly different than the prior one also because I've included the low property tax estimates. So as you might recall, the other one, the blue and the red line, were much closer together. But if for some reason the assessed valuation isn't growing as, you know, planned, then we have a little bit more work to do. I would say that's maybe a worst case scenario chart. So that's quite a lot of information that I just put before you. I hope I wasn't going too quickly, but this is really an informational item. So I'd love to dig into some of this or answer any questions.
Fascinating. Thank you. Director Corbett is back. Let's ask Director Rosario if you have any questions.
Yeah, this is fascinating. But my question for you is, if we were looking at the red and blue lines, if we were to go back 5 years, would you say that if you use the red line and used actual expenses, would you say for the most part that red line would be below the blue as far as revenue?
So we always balance our budgets. We really, you know, there was probably a really tough time at the end of the Great Recession when the Park District was really having to make a lot of, you know, cuts. But, and at that time, they may have been required to use some of the fund balance reserves. I think they had set aside additional smoothing funds and then were able to draw on that, kind of similar to what we've tried to set up here. But the district, you know, we have the balanced budget policy. And so we make those decisions at the time that we're adopting a budget. And then we have this really unique process, which is fantastic, where if we do come in better than expected, we use those opportunity monies, which we're deeming to be one time in nature, and we're able to fund these things. So the first time we ever set up the major infrastructure fund was with mid-year money, right? It was brought forward workshops, and then we decided to set aside money for the first time. Similar to the aquatic facilities, you know, we brought it forward as part of the mid-year appropriation. And so that's, in some ways, that's where the Park District is able to get ahead by setting this one-time money aside for these really important needs that we know are out there.
And then regarding the promissory notes, why is that necessarily cheaper than if, because this is really going towards the Peralta Oaks North. Is that really cheaper than just drawing from our reserves on a pay-as-you-go?
Well, we will certainly work with our financial consultants and run those numbers within the next year or two to determine whether, if you have a really good rate of interest rate when you issue debt, there is a benefit to the district. If you have a very low rate, you're able to, you know, keep your reserves, keep them earning interest. And the way, you know, it's kind of like a mortgage. Your facility is getting built, and then over time, you're continuing to pay for it rather than all at once. So it spreads out the useful life of the building and the cost hitting it through that time. But we'll look at that as we get there, and we can certainly do some out of reserves to make the debt service a little bit lower if necessary, or figure out what the rate is.
Okay, thank you.
Director Corbett, you want a little more time to go through your notes? I'll ask a question.
I'm ready with my question.
Okay, go.
So, AGM Ocker, how can we best use this fascinating information? And I'm using fascinating so I won't cry.
I think it's really pointing out that we do have trade-offs, and during every budget year, we have to make decisions. And our priority setting meetings, our board workshops where we do establish priorities, is really where we get to make those decisions. So I think at our board workshops, staff will be continuing to present these important needs that are out there and our plan for how we can fund them. You know, we're always looking for grants also. So these pictures are not really incorporating future other funding sources that might come available. But staff really needs to understand the priorities of the board members in order for us to evaluate those trade-offs.
And how is this information shared with, for example, not to pick on one department, but for example, governmental affairs, and how is this incorporated in our long-term strategies for financial resources of the future, not only grants and other, state and federal government assistance, but, other potential measures that may be on our horizon or should be.
Interesting, because when times are good and the chart is looking a little different, those lines are upside down. There's not as much of a need to analyze this information, but then when you're in a recession, there's a much closer watch, and there's a need to analyze what your growth rate is. So certainly, whenever we're working with government affairs, they have access to all of this information, and when we're looking at specific projects.
But do we have a strategic plan for future revenue? Like beyond what the work you do, crunching the numbers and making sure we're in balance. But do you know what I mean? Like actions we should be thinking about taking in the future years to address these lines. Things we have control over, that is.
Yes, I think government affairs and ASD are always looking at where can we get new funding sources. So in the situation where we're getting new land dedications, you'll be seeing a few more community facilities districts coming forward, which will include a funding component. And then, as I mentioned, government affairs is always out there watching over the federal and state budgets and doing the polling that we've been doing to see where the public is. And we will continue to do that.
Thank you.
Dr. Alvarez.
Thank you so much, Director Coffey. And I would like to add to Deborah's guidance that, in fact, we can also avail ourselves of best practices, what other public agencies have done in the past, to be able to have a thoughtful and informed trade-off conversation. So trade-off conversations are very difficult to be had in a galaxy with no framework and no guidance. So the framework and the guidance that we can rely upon on or lean into are things like a fee policy, which Deborah has heard me talk about that. And we were scheduled to do a fee policy for the Park District, and it got upended by COVID. But that policy is very difficult to do during a recession. That's best left during good economic times. But there's also another good tool that we can lean on, which is, again, to guide the trade-off conversations, is to do a 5-year capital improvement program. And again, that was also scheduled to be worked on, and it got upended by COVID. So we have a list of, Deborah and I have a list of parking lot items that we would like to do. And those are very big projects. The district has benefited from its good financial planning for decades, where you really didn't have to have those trade-off conversations. But when you have a universe or galaxy of capital projects funded at different stages, you really should have a more than a workshop conversation, a commitment through a policy document that says, this is the 5-year plan for the district, that these are the capital projects and the capital investments that we're going to be making for the next 5 years. So anything else, if it's not safety related, or if it's not responding to a natural disaster, it's not going to shift again. And that will help tremendously. The district has been very blessed in its ability to secure other people's monies, even in this galaxy of capital projects. But if you can imagine having a 5-year capital improvement program that says to the federal government or to the state government, these are our key priorities that have been defined, and these are the reasons why, and we can focus all of our efforts, and we can galvanize our workforce to say, this is what we're going to finance, and this is what we need to finance, and what we need to focus on. And But I say that with a certain level of caution, because if our general manager were here, he will be charming in to say, yes, Ana, but you also have to be opportunistic. And absolutely, we have to be ready with shovel-ready projects that we can jump on when the opportunities present themselves. So it's a balance. But definitely there's a body of work that we would like to engage with you in the coming, maybe in the coming 2 to 3 years. And it's regarding setting policy, priority through policy direction by the board.
If I may, Mr. Chair. I very much appreciate hearing about the parking lot. Every so often I talk to Deborah and I ask, when are we going to get to this point where we're starting to talk about what happens in the future as if we get close to a cliff, right? And this list reminds me of cliffish type realities. But I'm very much appreciative to hear that there is thinking about setting some structure, some planning, and addressing some big policy decisions that need to be made, because just at the maturity of our district, right, where we are in the world with the district, with all of the amazing things that have been done and all the great land that's been acquired. And I mean, this fabulous district, which, we all are very proud of and, believe is the best district in the universe. But we also, I think, I really like hearing the fact that we're starting to think about making some of those overall plans for infrastructure because of climate issues, because of our wonderful employees that we love and want to make sure we continue to support, and future employees we will need because of our lands, and just all of those things, aging structures, all of those different challenges. So I very much appreciate hearing that. And those things also help inform a bit the question I asked earlier about financial strategies, not budgetary strategies, but, we did measure FF because it was expiring. Do we have other things we should be looking at into the future, not just waiting for something to happen, but other planning into the future when we have that information that you're talking about, so we really know what those needs are. And just instinctively, I feel that we have those needs and we're going to have those needs. But having that data is so important also, as you did mention, as we not only plan our own potential measures, but also go out in government affairs and make the pitch for the funding we need support from our federal and state government partners for. So anyway, yeah, thank you. And I look very much forward to starting to take that parking lot and start addressing some of those plans. And hopefully COVID will allow us to start making some of those plans, even despite it.
Okay. Yeah, I appreciate it too, Deborah. It's a good tool for us to get all the larger picture issues that Director Corbett is talking about visibly in our minds. We're talking here about unfunded needs that are unfunded out of general funds. In other words, operational, what we're projecting to be operational. Funding depreciation is fundamental. But we have all sorts of other unfunded needs that I suspect you all look at as capital projects in the future. And therefore, we're going to not look at this chart, but we're going to look at capital funding, including funding that's available, as Dr. Alvarez says, from third parties, from other resources and sources of grant funding. So we got many buckets of unfunded needs that get filled ultimately from several different buckets of budgeting, is what I'm sensing and what I'm learning, and this is all very helpful. No action on this item. I got a note that we have a public comment.
Yes, Chair Coffey, Mr. Abreu does have one public comment.
Kelly, do you want to come on and give us your comment?
Okay, all right. Am I unmuted?
Yeah, I can hear you, Kelly.
All right. So as was noted before, well, I'm going to be focusing in on one item, and I'm going to be focusing in on it really hard, and I'm going to drill really, really deep. And it's property tax revenue estimates in the future 5 years. And that's a first assumption, because we were just told that we have to, everything is based on these assumptions. And I'm just looking at assumption number 1. And usually, just to give you my philosophy of life, when you hear a lot of words from people who are in the business of literature or management, the words are nice, but you have to look at the numbers very carefully. And I'm a technical guy. So we see that the increase begins at 4% in 2021, and compare back with last month. That's page 41 of last month's report, where a lot of the key numbers are hidden in this that were presented to you in this meeting. The increase begins in 4% in 2021. That's the midline revenue forecast for revenue increases, and goes up to 5.6% by 2026. And we are told that these increases are much lower than the growth rates in the last several years, which went as high as 7.5% a while back. So go and look at that chart on page 50 of 82 last month, and you see the chart of projections. You see that in the out years, they were projecting 5 years ago, in 2015, 2016, they were projecting 3.5% growth at the out years of the forecast. And then last year and the year before, they were projecting 4.5% growth in the out years. And this year, we're projecting 5.5% growth in the out years. We've hit this, what we're told is a major fiscal crisis that could rival 2009 or whatever. It could be the magnitude of the present fiscal crisis is unknown. And we see it appearing here as a 1% dip in projected revenues at 3.9% or 4.1% or whatever, around 4% in the upcoming fiscal year. And last month, we were told we were told that we were going to be using, for one of these years, we're going to be using the low forecast estimate, the low baseline case, which was 2.4%. But we don't see that 2.4% showing up anywhere here. It's we're using around 4% in the near year. Then in the following years, if you compare these revenues, the projected revenue forecast from what this year to last year the revenues were being forecast upwards of 4.5%, 4.5%, 5%. Now we're forecasting 5.5% growth for a lot of these years. So we're forecasting stronger revenues in the future today than we did last year. Stronger, much stronger. And what does that mean? Well, it means that as of this year, we're 1% down in our projected revenues cumulatively. Next year, we're 0.5% down. The following year, because the revenues are coming, the forecasts are so strong, we're now 0.5% up cumulatively on total revenue, cumulative revenues over the next 3 years. And the following year, we're 1.5% stronger position, more revenues cumulatively over the next over the next 4 years or so, 4 or 5 years, than we were last year. And so we're told the words that we just read from on these reports tell us of a dire, sad picture. But the numbers tell us that things are better than ever in the future. And all we have to do is get over this tiny little bump in the road of 1% revenue drop right now. And that is what I'm getting out of these reports. And I'm just telling you what's in the reports. I'm not even getting to the stage of questioning the reliability, validity, believability, rationality of the numbers and the projections. Not even there yet. Just asking about, do the numbers conform to the descriptions, about the descriptions of very somber forecast is belied by the numbers that show out years, fantastic growth, better and stronger than ever. And we will reach the next 3, 4 years from now, we will have more revenues and better revenue growth cumulatively, even including the bumps in the road.
Okay, Kelly, we got to wrap up what you're saying, please. You're done. And then my timing was good. Thank you. Thank you for your input. Any other thoughts from management, or should we go on to the next item on the agenda, directors? We're okay then. Let's do that. We'll move to item 5, Green Bond Annual Report for 2019. And I think we're carrying this over from the last meeting as well. Is this yours, Deb?
Hi there. Yeah, this is Deb Spalding, Assistant Finance Officer. And yes, this is a carry forward from last month, and it's actually a recap of 2019. So you've seen the full gamut of time frames in this Finance Committee meeting. So I'll start out by doing a recap of our green bond issuance. So back in 2017 was when we did our last bond issuance, and we issued $80 million in total of bonds. And of that amount, we carved out $30 million that we said was going to be categorized as green. And so categorizing part of our bond money as green meant that we could only use it in certain ways. So we could use it for projects that other people would feel that they would feel was green. And so things like land acquisition, habitat improvement, sea level rise mitigation, and trail creation. And the idea is that selling green bonds, there's a certain segment of the market that would be really interested in these projects, in that not only are we sort of building a market and getting more interest in green projects, but that we're like trying to grow the district's ability to do these projects. So we, of course, have many projects that we do at the Park District that would be excluded from that green definition. And so those would get funded from the $50 million that was not green bonds. So that's things that are recreational, our parking, restroom, visitor centers, et cetera. So as of the end of 2019, we had spent almost $20 million, almost 2/3 of the total $30 million that was issued. And so just have a few slides from the report, and I'll just do a quick shout out to Caitlin Stone, who helped out with proofreading and making this and gathering some of the data and making this report really look great, including the bird theme. And then David Callboy, who's on an acting assignment over in public safety, he helped with gathering the numbers for this report. So this is one of our completed projects. It was acquisition of the Olson property. And so we have incorporated, this is all just data that's from land acquisition presentation, so photos, and then we're able to quantify using a report that was done by the district, I'm gonna say maybe 5 years ago, where we looked at how much carbon sequestration the district's lands do. And we were able to take, there's different factors in that report that tell you, okay, if you have grassland or if you have mixed topography or whatever, how much carbon you're sequestering. So we looked at what kind of land we had, and then came up with how many tons of carbon would be sequestered annually through these projects. And here's our Dotson Marsh project, which was a multi-year enormously expensive project, and some of it was green bond funded, just a small portion of the total amount. And so this one is, habitat restorations. We quantify not only the amount of carbon sequestered, but how the habitat was improved, et cetera. Here was another acquisition project out in Byron Vernal Pools area in Vasco corridor. And again, 80 acres of grassland, so that sequesters 99 tons of carbon annually. And looks like that was my last slide. So it's always a nice diversion from the normal finance work to be able to put that information together. And that's the end of the presentation. Be happy to take any questions. I guess I'll just say that next year we are intending to issue our next series of WW bonds. And again, we'll be doing some of those as green bonds.
And again, it'll be interesting to see if this actually pays off in some kind of measurable lessening of the cost of issuance. That's going to be the very interesting facet of what we're doing. In the meantime, we've just cleared a road for green bond financing to expand in the markets. So it's been a terrific program to implement. Director Corbett?
I just have a comment along the same lines. Appreciate the wonderful creativity and brilliance to enter into this part of the market and as leaders. And I just want to say, and the report's very pretty too. Love those little birds. So thank you. This is something to be very proud of. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Rosario.
Nothing to add, really. Great report. And I think we'll all be watching how the green bonds perform in the future. And hopefully it'll continue to grow. Thank you very much.
All right.
All right. We are at, if there's no further comments, okay, we are at item 6, public comments. And I got a note that we have one pending from Meadow, I believe.
That's
And
correct.
The DGM had her hand up too.
I missed that. I'm sorry. Do you want to go before we call on Meadow, Dr. Alvarez?
Yes, thank you, Director Coffey. I just wanted to, before we move to public comment, just express my most sincere gratitude to Deb Spalding and Deborah Acker, because to venture into the green bonds as leaders is so fundamental to who we are as a district. And that speaks to being able to leverage our natural assets to continue enhancing the environment that clearly provides so much ecological services. That's what you're seeing here. So I love the fact that I hear Deb Spalding talking about carbon sequestration numbers. And I just had to thank you for giving me that moment, Director Coffey, because I can't tell you how much it warms my heart.
No, us too. Thank you for mentioning that. Anything else? Meadow, would you like to come on board for public comment?
Sure. Hello, directors. Hello, management staff. My name is Meadow Darcy. I'm the Chief Steward of AFSCME Local 2428, and I'm here speaking on behalf of AFSCME today. Just wanted to say two things. The first is I really appreciate the questions on the small trails crew from the board. We too like to support youth employment and bring diversity into the district. We think that's really important. And we've always been very supportive of different crews, the CCC crews, Civicor, SCA, AWP, all of those crews, so that we can get, a diverse work group coming into our district. And we are also, concerned about making sure that those crews are working on a temporary basis, and that those jobs are eventually turned into union jobs, which can help people support their life, their families, their health, etc. So I appreciate the questions that there were on the small trails crew. I have sent a message to the DGM as well as the HR manager, and so we will be discussing this a little bit later. But I would like to just thank you all for bringing up those questions, because we have those questions too. We always want to make sure that crews are in a limited duration type of position, and anything longer, that the district starts to look long-term at creating long-term jobs for those people. And then the second point I just wanted to make was I did have a couple of questions that I had submitted on September 30th. I know that has been passed down to Allison to get back to me just recently, but I did just want to put that on the record that I had some questions from September 30th of the data that was presented at the last meeting, and I still have not received a response. So I look forward to the response when I do get it. Thank you.
Thank you, Meadow. We've noted your emails on seeking follow-up to your questions on our last meeting, and we're informed that they're being worked on. And hopefully you'll get the responses, and there can be some dialogue following those. Any other public comments?
No Chair Coffee, although Mr. Abreu does still have his hand up, so I just wanted to double check. Mr. Abreu, do you have any additional comments? Okay, it looks like he took his hand down. So no Chair Coffee.
All right, then the last item is committee comments. I don't have any more. How about Director Corbett?
Just thanks for another great Finance Committee meeting.
Director Rosario?
I just wanted to, thank you. I just want this, another great meeting. I love the Finance Committee meetings. But I just wanted to circle back to a comment made by Director Corbett about a possible evening meeting. I think in the last 2 years, I think we've had the first first public hearing of the budget in the evening the last 2 years. So I'm hoping we can continue that just to give an opportunity to the public to have a voice, or a greater voice anyway, at least have that opportunity. So I put that up for everyone's consideration. Thank you.
And there isn't the commute issue by Zoom.
Right.
You know, there's going to be, for some regular ongoing public input matters that we have, the new experience with Zooming is going to change, I suspect, the way we do things on into the future. Because, you know, when you're talking about the expanse of Alameda and Contra Costa for people to travel to Oakland and attend meetings, you know, for an issue like the annual budget, that's made for Zooming. It would really double or triple the number of people we get involved in the budget process just by doing these types of proceedings. So I guess I'm agreeing with D. Deborah, you had a closing comment of sorts, maybe?
I actually had the same exact question that Director Rosario just brought up. We do have to post our public notice with a time on it. So if the committee could kind of direct us on what time you would like that December 1st meeting to begin, it would be the full board meeting would start at a later time. I know we had it at like 6 or 7 before, but the PAC meetings have been at 4 o'clock, successfully attended. So I'm not sure, you know, that gives you a big range of time. It's, you know, at your pleasure, we'll post the meeting and then report it out to the full board.
All right.
Did 6 o'clock work well last year, staff-wise and all that?
Any time that you choose will work well for us. I just will say, after being in Zoom meetings all day, I'm not sure how many people want to sign on again at 6, but it's kind of a unique year, right?
Yeah.
But that works for staff, that's fine.
Yes, well, some of us Zoom all day and all night.
And apparently we're going to be doing it maybe another year. I'm glad we all are paying attention to Dr. Fauci and not the President of the United States when we're doing this planning, both financially and in terms of our public business. Well, perhaps you could survey the board.
I think Rick Rickard just raised his hand. I don't know if he wants to provide some input.
Yes, I would like to just second what you said, Deborah. We have had very great success with the 4 o'clock PAC meetings, and we actually surveyed the members a couple of months ago to see if they wanted to go back to a later meeting, and we all pretty much agreed that 4 o'clock was a better time for the Zooms than the later meetings, so we stayed with that.
So Rick, a question, it was good for the committee members. Did you, were you able to get higher attendance from the public?
I think we've had the same public attendance that we've had in the past, which is, you know, 2 or 3 people generally. Kelly generally is there.
I do think with COVID that it still does make sense to have a meeting that might be in the evening hours, because there are people who are working 8 hours a day on Zoom. I feel for them. Sometimes I'm one of those people, but and also there are challenges during the day when people are schooling their kids during the day as well. So even though it makes for a long day, it still opens up a window of time that people might be able to come to a public meeting because they still do have daytime responsibilities of work and teaching and such things. So that's my thought. I think that, you know, the key is to try to see how we can make it easier for more members of the public. And I think it's worth, you know, trying again to see if 6 is good. But, you know, I'm glad to hear from other board members too.
I would be inclined to stay with 6.
Yeah, I think I would be, again, for the simple reason that my concern in the past has been for people having to get to Oakland during that commute hour. And we don't have that now. So I tend to agree with my colleagues.
Yes, and not having to drive during the you know, daylight savings is ending, so it's having to drive in the later night hour.
All of that, absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow, can we? Yes, Anna?
Yes, so I think that we have direction, and we will certainly follow up with we heard from the finance committee, the finance chair, and which also includes our board president. So we'll work with Yolanda and bring it to the general manager to see when we can for an evening board budget discussion. Absolutely. And it looks like 6 is the recommended time.
We'll just check with the other board members before we post the time. Great. Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate staff's flexibility as well.
Wow, we're going to end a meeting on time.
Woohoo!
Congratulations to all of us, and especially staff. The presentations were noticeably crisp, and I appreciate that very much. Anything else, or can we adjourn the meeting? Looks like we can. Yes.
I just wanted to thank you for posting those pictures of John Sutter that was really great.
I turned into an absolute fanboy. Just I ran into a starstruck park ranger down at the new park Sunday, and I was, "What's going on?" He says, "I have never met anybody who the park was actually named after." And I said, "What? What do you mean?" And he says, "Well, Judge Sutter is here," and he pointed out toward the pier. And I said, "Really?" And so that was quite a thrill. You know, it would have been like hiking in Tilden one afternoon and running into Charles Tilden. You know, it's that kind of experience. So I had to share those pictures.
Thank you for preserving that bit of history for us, Colin. It was really, really tough.
It's just pure coincidence of timing of our visit. Yes.
I just wanted to state that our next meeting in November will be on a Monday. It's scheduled for Monday, November 23rd, 12:30.
Oh, that's
because Deborah is having us work on the week of Thanksgiving. Yes, it's fine.